In the late 1960s, Northern California was terrorized by a mysterious killer who struck without warning. He taunted police with letters, cryptic codes, and the chilling words, "This is the Zodiac speaking." His identity remains unknown. Murders, puzzles, and fear. He became a legend that still haunts America. Who was the Zodiac Killer? The Zodiac Killer is one of the most famous, unidentified serial killers in American history. His crimes began in the late 1960s, during a time when California was experiencing major cultural shifts, from peace movements to political protests. In the middle of all this change, an anonymous figure emerged who terrorized Northern California with a combination of brutal attacks and psychological manipulation. What made the Zodiac Killer different was not only his violence, but the way he communicated. He didn't hide in silence. Instead, he wrote letters to newspapers, teased the police, and demanded public attention. He introduced himself with the chilling line, "This is the Zodiac speaking." His attacks were unpredictable, his motives unclear, and his identity remains unknown to this day. The combination of murders, coded messages, and arrogance created a legend that continues to fascinate investigators and the public. Even decades later, people still study his ciphers, revisit crime scenes, and debate theories online. The Zodiac case is more than a crime story. It is a psychological puzzle that America has never solved. Lake Herman Road. The Zodiac's first confirmed attack took place on December 20th, 1968, at a lonely spot known as Lake Herman Road near Vallejo, California. Teenagers Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were on a simple date, parked in a quiet area. What happened next marked the beginning of a nightmare. A mysterious driver pulled up behind them. There were no witnesses to the actual attack, but forensic evidence showed that the killer forced them out of the car. David was shot once in the head at close range. Betty Lou tried to flee, but was shot 5 times in the back as she ran. At the time, police had no idea they were dealing with a future serial killer. There were no suspects, no clear motives, and no leads strong enough to build a case. Everything seemed random. But months later, when the Zodiac began claiming responsibility for his crimes, investigators realized that this double murder was the start of something far more dangerous. Blue Rock Springs. The first phone call on July the 4th, 1969, another attack shook the Vallejo area. A couple, Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau, were sitting in a parked car at Blue Rock Springs Park. A vehicle approached them, left, and then returned. The driver stepped out, shining a bright flashlight into their faces. Before they could react, he opened fire with a 9mm handgun. Darlene was fatally wounded, but Mike survived despite being shot multiple times. What happened next changed everything. About 40 minutes later, Vallejo police received a phone call. The male caller calmly confessed to the shooting and also claimed responsibility for the earlier Lake Herman Road murders. He provided details only the killer would know. This was the moment the Zodiac Killer revealed himself. Not with a letter, not with a name, but with a cold, emotionless phone call. Investigators realized they were dealing with someone who wanted to play a game, someone who wasn't killing only for violence, but for attention and control. The letters that shocked California. Just weeks after the Blue Rock Springs attack, 3 major newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, received nearly identical letters. Each began with the words, "This is the Zodiac speaking." Inside the letters, the killer gave details about the attacks that only he could know. But what truly terrified the public was the inclusion of a cipher, a coded message made of symbols, shapes, and strange characters. The Zodiac demanded that the newspapers publish the cipher on their front pages, threatening more violence if they refused. The media reluctantly printed the letters. Fear spread across California. Who was this man? What did he want? Days later, a high school teacher named Donald Harden and his wife Betty cracked the code. Its message was disturbing. "I like killing people because it is so much fun." But despite his claim, the Zodiac did not reveal his identity, proving he enjoyed control and manipulation more than anything. Lake Berryessa. The hooded killer. On September 27, 1969, college students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were relaxing by the shore of Lake Berryessa. Their quiet afternoon turned into horror when a man approached wearing a bizarre costume, a black hood, similar to an executioner's mask, with a white zodiac symbol drawn on the chest. He claimed he was an escaped convict and needed money and a car. But the situation quickly escalated. He tied both victims with pre-cut rope and brutally stabbed them multiple times. Cecilia later died from her injuries, while Brian miraculously survived. Before escaping, the killer wrote a message on Brian's car door, listing the dates of his previous attacks, followed by the symbol again. This was the first attack in which the victims saw the Zodiac clearly, yet he remained unidentified. The Lake Berryessa attack proved that the Zodiac carefully planned his crimes and enjoyed theatrics. His mask, his calm behavior, and the writing on the car all showed that he wanted to be remembered. The murder itself was only one part of the performance. The murder of Paul Stine. A bold move. On October 11, 1969, San Francisco taxi driver Paul Stine picked up a passenger in the city's theater district. His final stop would be Presidio Heights, an upscale neighborhood nowhere near the Zodiac's previous attack zones. When the cab arrived, the passenger shot Stine in the head. Witnesses saw the killer wipe down the vehicle and tear a piece of Steiner's shirt before calmly walking away into the night. This attack was different. It wasn't a couple, it wasn't a remote location, it was a city street with multiple witnesses. Days later, the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter. Inside was a piece of Paul Stine's bloody shirt. The Zodiac was proving it was him. He also taunted the police, bragging about how easily he had escaped and threatening to target school buses next. This attack shocked investigators. The Zodiac had become bolder, more confident, and more theatrical. He was no longer hunting in isolated areas. He had walked straight into a populated neighborhood and vanished without a trace. The cryptic ciphers and taunts throughout his crime spree, the Zodiac sent numerous letters filled with bizarre symbols, threats, and riddles. These ciphers became a key part of his identity. Some were cracked quickly, while others remained unsolved for decades. One of the most famous was the 340 cipher, a long and complex code that experts struggled with for years. In 2020, so more than 50 years later, a team of code breakers finally solved it. The message mocked the police, claiming they would never catch him, and repeated his philosophy about killing. Despite all his letters, the Zodiac never revealed his real name, despite repeatedly hinting that he would. His goal wasn't confession, it was manipulation. He wanted attention, panic, and mystery. In many ways, the ciphers became more important than the murders themselves. They turned the Zodiac into a legend, a puzzle people tried to solve across generations. And the fact that some ciphers remain unsolved keeps the mystery alive even today. The main suspects. Over the decades, police and amateur detectives have suggested dozens of suspects. The most famous and heavily investigated was Arthur Lee Allen, a troubled man who lived in the area and had a history of violent behavior. He matched certain descriptions, owned weapons similar to Zodiac's, and behaved suspiciously after some attacks. However, fingerprints, handwriting analysis, and DNA evidence never officially linked Allen to the crimes. Even though many still believe he was the Zodiac, the case against him remains circumstantial. Other suspects included Richard Gaikowski, a newspaper editor, Lawrence Kane, a man with memory problems, and Earl Van Best Jr., accused in a controversial book by his own son. But again, no conclusive evidence has ever been found. One reason identifying the Zodiac is so difficult is because he left almost no reliable physical evidence. His crimes seemed random, and he changed weapons and methods frequently. In the end, hundreds of tips led nowhere, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. Why the Zodiac was never caught? Several factors allowed the Zodiac Killer to remain unidentified. First, he chose random victims in isolated places, making it nearly impossible to predict his next move. There was no pattern of relationships, no clear motive, and no personal connection between him and the victims. Second, his communication style caused confusion. Multiple police departments were involved, and in the late 1960s, information sharing was not efficient. Important clues were often delayed or separated between jurisdictions. Third, the Zodiac carefully avoided leaving useful physical evidence. He wore gloves, wiped down surfaces, and changed weapons frequently. His letters added another layer of misdirection, psychological warfare designed to distract investigators. Finally, the era itself played a role. DNA technology didn't exist, surveillance was limited, and crime scene procedures were not as advanced as today. Even with modern tools, evidence has degraded too much to produce clear answers. All of this allowed the Zodiac to slip through the cracks and become a permanent mystery. The enduring mystery today, more than 50 years later, the Zodiac Killer remains one of the most iconic unsolved cases in American history. His crimes, letters, and ciphers continue to fascinate true crime investigators, cryptographers, filmmakers, and online communities. Every few years, a new theory appears, a new suspect, a new interpretation of a cipher, or a new claim of identity. Yet none have been proven. The mystery has grown larger than the crimes themselves. The Zodiac became a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that some puzzles remain unsolved despite decades of effort. Why does the case still captivate people? Because the Zodiac wasn't just a killer. He was a manipulator, a performer, and a puzzle maker. He wanted to be remembered, and he succeeded. As of today, he remains unidentified. His motives are still debated, and some of his codes have never been cracked. The Zodiac Killer may have stopped writing, but the mystery he created continues to haunt history. The Zodiac Killer's shadow may linger, but on this channel, you can explore every chilling detail safely from the comfort of your screen. Thanks for watching. Subscribe now and join us for more shocking true crime stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.